It was a dark and stormy night, and Emma was driving home from a late shift at work. The rain was pouring down so hard that she could barely see the road ahead of her. As she approached a sharp turn, her headlights caught something in the distance. It was a woman, drenched and shivering, standing on the side of the road. Emma slowed down and rolled down her window to ask if the woman needed help. The woman stepped closer to the car, and Emma could see that her face was contorted with fear. "Please, you have to help me," she begged. "My car broke down a few miles back, and I've been walking in the rain for hours. I just need a ride to the next town." Feeling sorry for the woman, Emma unlocked the passenger door and let her in. As soon as the woman got into the car, Emma noticed that her hands were ice cold, and her clothes were clinging to her body. Emma asked the woman if she was okay, but she didn't answer. Instead, she just stared out the window, her eyes fixed on something in the darkness. As Emma drove further into the storm, she began to feel uneasy. The woman's silence was unsettling, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Suddenly, the woman's head snapped around, and she looked Emma directly in the eye. Her expression was twisted and malicious, and Emma knew that she was in danger. Before Emma could react, the woman lunged at her with a knife. Emma swerved the car off the road, and the two of them tumbled out onto the ground. In the chaos, Emma managed to grab the knife and defend herself. As she held the woman at bay, Emma realized that she recognized her face. It was her own reflection staring back at her from a nearby puddle. Emma had been driving herself insane, haunted by a traumatic event that had happened years ago. The woman in the storm was just a figment of her imagination. Shaken by the realization, Emma drove home, grateful to be alive. But as she walked through the front door, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Standing in the hallway was the woman from the storm, real this time, and she was holding a knife. Jenny had always loved hiking. There was something about the wilderness that spoke to her soul, and she loved the feeling of being out in the open air, surrounded by nothing but nature. One weekend, Jenny decided to take a solo hike in the mountains. She had been on this trail before, so she felt confident that she could handle it on her own. She packed a backpack with some snacks and water, put on her hiking boots, and set off. At first, the hike went smoothly. Jenny felt invigorated by the fresh air and the exercise, and she enjoyed the feeling of solitude as she made her way up the mountain. But as she got higher, the trail became steeper and more treacherous. She had to scramble up rocks and navigate narrow ledges, and she started to feel a bit uneasy. She had underestimated the difficulty of the trail, and now she was worried that she might not make it back down safely. As she climbed higher, the trail became more and more narrow. It was little more than a rocky ledge, with a sheer drop-off on one side. Jenny had to hug the wall of the mountain to keep her balance, and she felt her heart racing as she looked down at the dizzying drop below. And that's when she saw it. A figure, standing on the ledge just ahead of her. At first, Jenny thought it was another hiker, but as she got closer, she realized that it was something else entirely. The figure was tall and thin, with long arms and legs that seemed to be made of twigs and branches. Its face was obscured by a tangle of vines and leaves, and its eyes glowed with an eerie green light. Jenny froze in terror. She had never seen anything like it before, and she didn't know what to do. But the figure didn't seem to notice her. It just stood there, swaying slightly in the breeze. Jenny didn't know how long she stood there, watching the figure. It felt like hours, but it could have been only minutes. Eventually, she managed to summon up the courage to move again. She inched her way past the figure, keeping her eyes down and her breath shallow. But as she passed the figure, she felt a jolt of pain in her leg. She looked down to see a vine wrapped tightly around her ankle. and she realized that she had been caught in a trap. The vines started to pull her toward the edge of the ledge, and she screamed in terror. She tried to claw her way back, but the vines were too strong. Just as she thought she was going to be pulled over the edge, the figure reached out a hand and grabbed her. Its touch was cold and clammy, like the touch of a dead thing. For a moment, Jenny thought that she was saved. But then, she realized that the figure wasn't trying to help her. It was pulling her closer, its green eyes glowing brighter and brighter. And that's when Jenny realized the shocking truth. The figure was not some monster or ghost, but a human being, twisted and distorted by the magic of the mountain. It was too late for Jenny to save herself. She was pulled over the edge, tumbling down the mountain, but not before catching a glimpse of the twisted face of the figure that had trapped her. Jenny's body was never found, and her disappearance remains a mystery to this day. But those who hike the trail say that they can sometimes hear her screams echoing through the mountains, and that they catch glimpses of the figure that took her, stalking through the wilderness. Emily had always been fascinated by the paranormal. She loved reading about ghosts and hauntings, and she spent hours watching videos of supernatural phenomena on YouTube. One day, Emily decided to take her interest in the paranormal to the next level. She signed up for a ghost tour of an old abandoned prison on the outskirts of town. The tour started at sunset, and Emily was thrilled as she followed the guide through the dark and creepy corridors of the prison. She listened eagerly as the guide told stories of the inmates who had been executed there, and of the ghostly apparitions that still haunted the halls. But as the tour went on, Emily began to feel uneasy. She felt like she was being watched, like someone was following her through the shadows. At one point, the group stopped in front of a cell that was said to be particularly haunted. The guide recounted the story of a notorious serial killer who had been locked up in that very cell before he was executed. Emily was captivated by the story, and she stepped closer to the cell to get a better look. And that's when she saw it. A figure, standing in the cell, staring back at her with cold, dead eyes. Emily froze in terror. She had never seen anything like it before. The figure was not a ghost or an apparition, but a real person, standing in the cell and staring at her. The figure stepped closer, and Emily could see that he was not a ghost at all, but a living, breathing man. He was tall and thin, with greasy hair and a wild look in his eyes. Emily stumbled back, but the man grabbed her arm and pulled her into the cell. She screamed for help, but the other members of the tour were too far away to hear her. The man held her tightly, and Emily could feel his breath on her neck. She was sure that he was going to kill her. But then, something strange happened. The man's grip loosened, and he looked up in terror. Emily followed his gaze and saw something that made her blood run cold. A group of ghostly figures, floating in the air above them, with cold, dead eyes and twisted faces. They reached down and grabbed the man, pulling him up into the air and dragging him away. Emily was left alone in the cell, shaking with fear. She had always wanted to see a ghost, but she never imagined that she would be saved by one. As she stumbled out of the cell, she realized that the man she had seen was not a serial killer at all, but a deranged man who had been living in the prison, hiding from the law. Emily never forgot the terror of that night, but she also never forgot the strange and supernatural forces that had saved her life. She knew that she would never be the same again. Sarah had always been fascinated by the abandoned house at the end of her street. It had been vacant for as long as she could remember, and the old, creaky building seemed to hold endless secrets and mysteries. One day, Sarah decided to explore the abandoned house. She climbed through a broken window and started to explore the dusty, cobweb-filled rooms. As she made her way through the house, She heard strange noises coming from upstairs. At first, she thought it was just the old house settling, but as the noises grew louder and more persistent, she started to feel uneasy. She cautiously climbed the stairs and followed the sounds to a locked door at the end of the hallway. Sarah's curiosity got the better of her, and she jimmied the lock with a hairpin. As she pushed open the door, she was hit with a foul smell that made her gag. The room was pitch black, and Sarah couldn't see a thing. But then, she heard a faint whisper, coming from somewhere in the darkness. "Help me." The voice was barely audible, but Sarah could feel the desperation in it. She slowly made her way into the room, her heart racing with fear. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Sarah could make out a figure lying on the ground. She stepped closer, and her stomach turned at the sight before her. It was a young girl, lying motionless on the ground. Her face was twisted in agony, and her skin was a sickly grey color. Sarah realized with horror that the girl was dead. As she turned to run from the room, she heard the whisper again. "Help me." Sarah hesitated for a moment, her heart racing. She knew that she should leave the house and call the police, but something inside her told her to stay and help the girl. She slowly approached the body and reached out to touch it. And that's when something unexpected happened. The girl's eyes snapped open, and she sat up, screaming. Sarah stumbled back in terror, but the girl reached out and grabbed her. It was then that Sarah realized the shocking truth. The girl was not dead at all, but had been lying in a deep, coma-like state. She had been trapped in the abandoned house for years, and her only hope of escape was to lure someone in to help her. But now that Sarah had awakened her, there was no turning back. The girl had been consumed by a hunger for life and would do anything to keep herself from slipping back into that coma. And Sarah, trapped in the abandoned house with the girl, realized that she was in grave danger. Sarah tried to free herself from the girl's grasp, but she was too strong. She dragged Sarah towards the wall and pushed her against it. Sarah's head hit the wall, and she felt a sharp pain in the back of her skull. She tried to scream, but the girl covered her mouth with her hand. The girl whispered, "Don't fight it. You'll see, it's not so bad. It's wonderful to be alive." Sarah struggled, but the girl was too strong. She could feel her consciousness slipping away as the girl's grip tightened. She closed her eyes and prepared for the worst. But then, there was a sudden flash of light, and the girl screamed in pain. Sarah opened her eyes to see a group of police officers storming into the room. The girl released her grip on Sarah and tried to flee, but the police caught her and took her into custody. Sarah was rushed to the hospital, where she was treated for a concussion and several bruises. As she recovered, Sarah learned more about the girl's story. She had been trapped in the abandoned house for years, unable to move or speak. She had been in a coma-like state, aware of everything that was happening around her but unable to communicate. She had somehow managed to reach out to Sarah through her dreams, convincing her to come to the house and free her from her prison. But in the end, it was the police who had rescued her. Sarah never forgot the terrifying experience, but she also never forgot the feeling of being able to help someone in need. She vowed to always be open to the whispers of those in need, no matter how impossible they may seem. There was a small village nestled in the mountains, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. The villagers were simple people, who lived off the land and rarely ventured beyond the safety of their homes. But one day, a group of travelers arrived in the village. They were dressed in strange clothing and spoke a language that no one understood. The villagers were weary of the newcomers, but they welcomed them nonetheless. The travelers seemed friendly at first, but as the days passed, strange things began to happen. Villagers reported seeing shadows moving on their own, and hearing whispers in the dead of night. The travelers always seemed to be nearby whenever these occurrences happened, but they denied any involvement. One night, a young girl disappeared from her home. The villagers searched high and low, but she was nowhere to be found. They questioned the travelers, but they claimed to know nothing. As the days passed, more and more villagers began to disappear. Fear spread throughout the village like a wildfire. The travelers were suspected, but they always seemed to be one step ahead of the villagers. One night, a group of villagers decided to take matters into their own hands. They snuck into the travelers' camp, determined to find evidence of their wrongdoing. What they found was beyond anything they could have imagined. The travelers were not human at all, but a group of shape-shifting creatures who had been preying on the villagers for food. They had been taking the form of the missing villagers to blend in with the community. The villagers fought back, but it was a losing battle. The creatures were too powerful, too fast. The only option left was to flee. As the villagers ran for their lives, they heard a roar coming from the forest. They turned to see a pack of wolves, led by a massive alpha male, charging towards the travelers' camp. The wolves attacked the creatures with ferocity, tearing them apart limb by limb. The villagers watched in awe as the creatures were destroyed, one by one. When the sun rose the next morning, the travelers' camp was nothing but a pile of rubble. The villagers were shaken, but grateful to be alive. They had learned the hard way that not everything is as it seems, and that sometimes, the greatest danger can come from the most unexpected sources. There was a small town on the edge of a dense forest, where the trees were so tall they seemed to touch the sky. The town was quiet and peaceful, but there was a legend that had been passed down from generation to generation. The legend spoke of a mysterious creature that lived in the forest, deep in the heart of the woods. It was said to be a shapeshifter, able to take on any form it wished, and that it could control the minds of those it encountered. For many years, the legend remained just that, a story that parents told their children to keep them from straying too far into the woods. But one day, a group of hikers decided to test the legend and venture into the forest. As they walked deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller and the air grew thicker. Suddenly, they came upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a creature unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was tall and slender, with skin as white as snow and eyes that glowed like stars. It looked almost human, but something about it was off. The hikers could feel a strange energy emanating from the creature, as if it were trying to control their minds. They tried to run, but their legs wouldn't move. The creature had taken hold of their minds and wouldn't let go. Days turned into weeks, and the hikers never returned. Their families searched for them, but they were never found. The legend of the creature became more and more terrifying as the years passed, until no one dared venture into the woods again. But one day, a brave young girl decided to face her fears and explore the forest. She had heard the legend of the creature, but she refused to believe it was real. As she walked deeper into the woods, she felt a strange energy in the air. Suddenly, she saw the creature standing before her, its eyes glowing like stars. But instead of feeling fear, she felt a strange sense of calm. The creature spoke to her, telling her that it was not a monster, but a guardian of the forest. It had taken the hikers to protect them from the dangers of the woods, and it had kept them safe. The young girl listened to the creature's words and felt a sense of peace wash over her. She realized that the legend had been wrong all along, and that sometimes, the things we fear the most are not what they seem. In a small village, there lived a young girl named Lily. Lily was a kind-hearted girl, always willing to help those in need. But one day, something strange began to happen. Whenever Lily was around, Strange things would occur. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and shadows seemed to follow her wherever she went. At first, Lily thought it was just her imagination, but soon she realized that something was not right. She tried to ignore it, but the strange occurrences continued to happen. One day, while walking in the forest, Lily came across an old woman who was gathering herbs. The woman looked up at Lily and said, "My dear, you are not like other girls. You have a gift that can be both a blessing and a curse." Lily was confused and asked the woman what she meant. The old woman replied, "You have a gift of magic. You can harness the power of the universe and use it to do good or evil." Lily was frightened by the old woman's words and didn't know what to do. She decided to go to the village elder for guidance. The elder listened to Lily's story and knew what had to be done. She took Lily to a secret chamber deep beneath the village, where she found a book of magic. The elder taught Lily how to harness her powers for good and how to protect herself from those who would try to use the gift for evil. Lily trained for many years, and she became one of the most powerful sorceresses in the land. She used her gift to help those in need and to protect the village from harm. But one day, an evil sorcerer came to the village. He saw Lily's powers and wanted to use them for his own evil deeds. He challenged Lily to a duel, and the two sorcerers battled fiercely. In the end, Lily emerged victorious, but she was gravely injured. The villagers tended to her wounds and nursed her back to health, but she knew that her powers had come with a price. From that day on, Lily knew that her gift of magic was not just a blessing, but also a curse. She used her powers carefully and only when necessary, knowing that the true strength of magic lay in its ability to do both good and evil. There was once a group of friends who loved to explore abandoned places. They would spend hours scouring the internet for information on abandoned buildings and landmarks and then venture out to explore them. One day, they came across an old abandoned hospital. It was said that the hospital had been closed down years ago due to a deadly virus that had broken out, and the entire hospital had been quarantined. The group of friends were intrigued and decided to explore the hospital. As they made their way through the hospital, they found strange symbols etched on the walls and floors, and an eerie silence hung over the entire place. As they explored deeper into the hospital, they heard strange noises coming from one of the rooms. It sounded like someone was crying. The friends cautiously approached the room and found a young girl sitting in the corner, crying. The girl looked up at them and said, "Please, you have to help me. I've been trapped here for years, ever since the virus broke out. I can't leave this place." The friends were shocked and didn't know what to do. They decided to take the girl with them, but as they were leaving, they heard a loud rumbling sound coming from the floor. The floor began to shake, and the walls started to crumble. The friends realized too late that they had disturbed something they shouldn't have, and now they were paying the price. The group of friends were swallowed up by the collapsing hospital, and the young girl's cries echoed through the ruins. But as the dust settled, something strange happened. The young girl disappeared, and in her place, the friends saw the ghostly figures of patients who had died from the virus. The friends realized that they had been lured into a trap, and the young girl was just a decoy. The real trap was the deadly virus that had contaminated the hospital and still lingered in the air. The friends here breathed it in, and now they too were doomed to become ghostly figures haunting the abandoned hospital. There was a small, remote village in the mountains that was rumored to be cursed. The villagers had lived there for generations, and they had always believed that there was a malevolent spirit that haunted their village. One day, a group of young tourists decided to visit the village to see if the rumors were true. They were warned by the locals not to stay too long, but the tourists were curious and wanted to explore the village. As they wandered through the village, they saw strange symbols etched on the walls of the houses, and an eerie silence hung over the entire place. They felt like they were being watched and followed, but every time they turned around, there was no one there. As night fell, the tourists decided to rest in one of the abandoned houses. They built a fire and settled in for the night, but as they slept, they were awoken by strange noises. The tourists saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching them. The figure was tall and thin, with long limbs and a face shrouded in darkness. The tourists were terrified and tried to run, but the figure was too fast. The figure chased them through the village, and the tourists soon realized that they were being herded towards a cave on the outskirts of the village. As they entered the cave, they saw that it was filled with bones and decayed flesh. Suddenly, the figure appeared before them, and the tourists realized too late that they had fallen into the clutches of a cursed spirit that had haunted the village for centuries. The figure revealed that it had been using the rumors to lure people to the village, where it could feed on their fear and devour their souls. The tourists tried to escape, but the cursed spirit was too powerful. One by one, they fell victim to its wrath, and their screams echoed through the mountains. In the end, the cursed village claimed yet another group of unsuspecting victims, and the cursed spirit continued to haunt the mountains for years to come. In a small town, there was an abandoned amusement park that was said to be haunted. The park had been closed for years after a string of accidents that left several people dead. One night, a group of teenagers decided to sneak into the park to explore and see if the rumors were true. They climbed the fence and made their way through the deserted park, marveling at the rusted rides and faded signs. As they wandered through the park, they heard strange noises and saw glimpses of movement out of the corners of their eyes. But every time they turned to look, there was nothing there. The teenagers decided to split up to cover more ground, but soon they realized they were lost and couldn't find their way back to the entrance. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped in the park. As they searched for a way out, they heard a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the park. They followed the sound to the entrance of the old roller coaster, where they saw a figure standing in the shadows. The figure was dressed in a tattered clown suit and had a grotesque mask covering its face. It held a large axe in its hand and started to slowly move towards the teenagers. The teenagers were paralyzed with fear as the figure got closer and closer. They realized too late that they had stumbled upon the ghost of a former clown who had died in an accident on the roller coaster years ago. The ghostly clown lunged at the teenagers with the axe, but they managed to escape by hiding in one of the abandoned rides. As they caught their breath, they realized that they had to find a way out of the park before the ghostly clown found them again. They searched frantically for a way out and finally stumbled upon a hidden exit. They ran as fast as they could, not looking back until they were safely outside the park. The teenagers never spoke of their terrifying encounter again, but they knew that they had come face to face with a vengeful spirit of the haunted amusement park.